Well, the youngest prisoner held in Guantanamo Bay prison is set to finish off his sentence in his native Canada. Omar Khadr has been flown to a military base in Ontario and transferred to a maximum security prison. Khadr was 15 years old when he was captured in Afghanistan in 2002. He was held at Guantanamo Bay prison for 6 years. In 2010, he struck a plea deal which saw him sentenced to 8 years in prison for different war crimes. U.S. President Barack Obama had promised to shut down Guantanamo Bay, but the notorious prison still remains open. Well, for more on that story, we're joined by our correspondent, Joshua Blakeney, who's with us from Calgary, Alberta, Canada. Joshua, are there any details you have to share with us about the transfer of custody of Omar Khadr?
Yes, well, as soon as he's arrived in Canada, he's been spirited away to one of Canada's maximum security prisons by the Harper regime, who, of course, would like anything but for him to get to the streets of Canada, where he would, of course, testify to the Canadian people on university campuses and so on about the treatment that was meted out upon him in the Guantanamo Bay torture camp. Of course, this was a child soldier who, at the age of 15, was kidnapped at gunpoint from Afghanistan, where his family lived. He was born in Canada, in Toronto, so he's a Canadian citizen. The Canadian judiciary have indicted the Harper government for having allowed this child soldier's Canadian charter rights, his rights that are protected nominally under the Canadian Constitution, to allow them to have been impinged upon by the U.S. government, a foreign government, which kidnapped this Canadian citizen and took him to Guantanamo Bay for a decade. Now, the Canadian media is reporting that he's a war criminal, a confessed war criminal, a confessed terrorist. But this is the addendum has to be added to this. All of these confessions took place while this child soldier was under duress in a torture camp. And so, and human rights lawyers have drawn attention to this fact. And so he's been treated in Canada as if he's a terrorist rather than a victim of war. Of course, the United Nations does indeed have a convention on the rights of the child, which does stipulate that people like Omar Khadr, who got caught up in war as a child, ought to be treated as a victim of war rather than as a combatant. So he's been brought into Canada with this media fanfare, whipping up bigotry towards him, calling him a terrorist and a killer of a U.S. soldier. But all these confessions were not extracted under objective and judicious circumstances. And so there's many Canadians. I went to the streets of Calgary and interviewed ordinary Canadians on the street. And this is a stronghold of the Harper government. That even here, everyone was saying he should be treated as a victim of war. He should be in Canada. He should at least have fair legal proceedings. And none of this has taken place hitherto. And so him being taken away and incarcerated in a maximum security prison, possibly for the rest of his life, at the very least probably for 8 years, beggars belief. And the Canadian citizenry, I hope, will continue to stand up for the rights of this child soldier, insist that he's not treated as a terrorist or a criminal, that evidence be adduced to support that assertion, or else he should be exonerated and apologized to for having been left in a torture camp. Many Canadians also feel the Harper government didn't really do its best to advocate for this Canadian citizen because, of course, the mythology of the war on terror, that there's a terrorist threat from something called Al-Qaeda, was what brought the Harper government into power, that it was going to sort of crack down on this so-called terrorist threat, which, of course, statistics prove doesn't actually exist in Canada. So many Canadians are, of course, disgruntled when they view their government continuing the mythology of the war on terror and failing to treat a child soldier as a victim of war.
Joshua Blakeney, Press TV's correspondent from Calgary, many thanks for the update. Well, for those of you who are just joining us, you're watching Press TV's World News. These are our headlines. Another attack on U.S.-led forces by Afghan security personnel kills a soldier and a contractor. 52 foreign troops have been killed in 36 such attacks this year. Yemen's president admits for